Hey guys, DJ here at Top Tick Cards and Games. Today I'm going to talk about the Magician Performage deck. Not a whole lot of Magician or Performage in here, but together enough that I think you can tack both names on it. It's probably the strongest deck at the moment. It's a pretty popular deck. If you've been keeping up with tournaments, I'm sure you've seen it around. This is a fairly standard list, but I kind of just wanted to talk about the deck a little bit and just go over some of the choices that are made in the deck and ways you can kind of bring your list together. So to start off, we have 3 Performapal Skullcrobat Jokers. Joker can search out Magician or Performapal cards. In this deck, he's only going to search Magicians as he is the only Performapal in our deck. But he is basically the strongest normal summon in your deck. You're going to summon him and he's going to set up your plays very well, or at least give you an extra monster you can pendulum summon with. Next up we have our Magician cards. We have 3 copies of Wisdom Eye Magician. Wisdom Eye sets up your extra deck so you can make plays for very little resource investment by putting himself into your extra deck but keeping your scales intact. It's also a level 4 and a 5 scale, which are both the relevant numbers for this deck really. Then we have 2 copies of Dragon Pulse Magician. Dragon Pulse is also a level 4 and an Earth monster, which are both relevant things. It's a 1 scale, which is good because we need more low scales in this deck. And it's got 1800 attack and a reasonable utility ability. Finally, we have 1 copy of Dragon Pit Magician. You play a copy of Dragon Pit for the utility he brings by clearing your opponent's floodgates and stuff. In general, you don't really want to fill your Pendulum Zone up with these cards. If you can avoid it unless you're making a Wisdom Eye play. So, we only play 1 copy of him. We don't plan on filling our zone with him all the time, but it is a good option to have, and with Joker and Pendulum Call in our deck, it's pretty easy to get to him. Next we have 3 copies of Luster Pendulum. Luster is just too good to not play in a deck like this, obviously. It sets up your extra deck, putting whatever you want in there. It sets off Plush Fire to really set off a lot of rank 4 plays, and it's a tuner to make Ignister. Really just a necessary card. This card and these cards are really why this deck is in kind of a tough place sometimes, but at the same time they're also the reason this deck is so good. These cards clash horrendously when you draw both of them at the same time. But if you draw half your deck, the right half, this deck is just so broken. And when they overlap, it's still not the end of the world because these guys are still going to be pendulum monsters. They're still able to put extra guys into your extra deck to use for your pendulum summons. And Luster Pendulum is still going to let you make Ignister and OTK. Next up, we have some Performage cards. We have 3 copies of Plush Fire. Plush Fire is every bit as good as he was before. A little bit less since we don't play like Doomstar or Break or anything to pop it ourselves. But we still have Wavering Eyes, we still have Luster Pendulum. It's still just insane, and it helps protect yourself from Wavering Eyes by putting itself into your Pendulum, or extra deck rather, sorry. Next we have 2 copies of Performage Mirror Conductor. Mirror Conductor is pretty average. You need enough low scales to function though. You should not have your games lasting more than a couple turns each. As such, even if your opponent clears your low scales every turn, you only need about 3 or 4 of them to function. I chose to play 4, and that's why I have 2 copies of Mirror Conductor. In addition, that lets your Luster Pendulum pop Mirror Conductor if that's the play that you have access to, and I don't really want to give up the ability to do that, so I definitely wanted to have 2 copies of Mirror Conductor in my deck list. Now we have 3 Damage Jugglers. I've talked about Damage Juggler a lot since Wavering Eyes came big into the format, and everything I've said about it before holds true here. You need to stop your opponent's Wavering Eyes, you need to stop your opponent's OTKs, and this card just lets you float such strong plays by searching all your Performages. We also played the 2 generic Performage monsters, 1 Hat Tricker and 1 Trip Clown. Hat Tricker actually has more value now than he used to because you need to be able to make ways to clear your opponent's Naturia Beast. That's the name of that card. Crap, drawing so many blanks today. He lets you make a rank 4 and try to clear your opponent's Naturia Beast before combat, so it lets you just deal with your opponent's board a little bit easier, though they can set up boards that's not even going to be enough. Pretty simply. Next we have our Reptile Engine, the Arcane of Verilum search. We have a Masked Chameleon, a Gigabyte, and an X-Saber Palomero. Gigabyte serves the same purpose of Hat Trigger, just letting you make a rank 4 before combat to try to get rid of your opponent's beast if they make it, or something else that's going to be a problem. Masked Chameleon is a searchable way to make Ignister and Cyframe Omega. And Palomero lets you make Naturia Beast so you can force your opponent to have the answer to it. It's just too good of an ability to not have access to in this deck at the cost of 1 slot. This isn't a very reliable way to lock the game down if you don't play Brilliant Fusion. And because of that, we have a copy of Gemini Garnet to go with our Brilliant Fusion so that we can get an extra summon in our deck. Onto our spell cards, we have 3 Upstart Goblins, self-explanatory. We just want a smaller deck, we want to see our good cards. We have 3 copies of Pendulum Call. Even though we don't have a ton of Magician monsters, we still want to play 3 calls. It lets us turn cards in our hand into more cards that we can Pendulum Summon. Lets us set our scales up, and it lets us create scales that can't be Waveringized if you have a good read your opponent has it, or you just feel like you need to play around it just in case. Also has the bonus ability of being able to tutor up a monster destruction effect or a spell trap destruction effect in Dragon Pit and Dragon Pulse. Next we have 3 copies of Wavering Eyes, which I think is key because every big deck in the format is a pendulum deck really. There is Cosmo, but I don't think Cosmo is as strong as these decks, and I think that you're at the advantage already by playing one of the pendulum decks. The big thing Cosmo can do is play Anti-Spell Fragrance, but I think you just kind of deal with that game 1. If you lose, your deck's better than theirs, so you should be winning the post-board games in that situation. Next we have our fusion spells, 2 instant fusions and 2 brilliant fusions. The reason for not playing more copies of either of these is you can get away with 1 copy of both of these guys in our extra deck, 1 Seraphinite and 1 Norden. If you play 3 copies of either of these cards, you're more likely to open multiples of either one of them. And if you open 2, you're just playing with a much more dead hand. You can't use 2 of either of them in a turn. And you just gain nothing from having them sitting there. So you gain extra deck space and you lose dead cards by playing 2 copies of each of these. And I think that's really where you want to be. I can see arguments for not playing Brilliant Fusion at all, but I don't think the Naturia Beast play works as well, or even using Masked Chameleon to make like an Ignister or something if you don't play it. I go back and forth on this card, but I think it's worth playing, mostly just because I want more copies of Foolish Burial so I can find Flushfire. We are playing Foolish, and really this card a lot of the time is just going to be a Foolish Burial. You're going to dump Damage Juggler so that you can search out Flushfire and make your plays. So that's the main board. This deck is extremely standard. One thing that I have considered a lot is the inclusion of Typhoon in my main board. I've thought about playing as many as 3 of them several times. The downside is that it's not a very good card when your opponent is playing Pendulum Call as well. So in mirror matches, sometimes it's a dead card, but even still, if you get more than the 1 turn where they play Pendulum Call, you'll be able to at least clear some of their scales. And in that situation, it's not the worst card ever. But it also clears out Floodgates. So I wouldn't fault anyone for playing 2 or 3 copies of this card in their main board in the format right now. I don't think it's a bad choice, and I almost put them in here for this, but I decided just to make the most standard video possible. Another thing you guys probably noticed is this is legitimately just a copy and paste deck, basically. I've changed a couple slots from the most standard list available. I don't think that there's really much more you need to change. I kind of gave my explanations on a lot of stuff in here that I've tweaked numbers on. A couple other cards that I considered playing were stuff like Zephyros, more copies of Dragon Pit Magician. Is that the big one? I don't know their names between the 2. Yeah, more copies of Dragon Pit Magician, and including stuff like Kieran in this deck as ways to stop your opponent from OTKing you because of how blisteringly fast this deck is. But, I mean, a lot of the cards are just so mandatory, there's not a lot you can change. And being able to really familiarize yourself with the deck so you know how it works is great if you want to play anything else in the format. So you guys should definitely, if you're going to like a regional soon or something before Bosch comes out, you want to check this deck out and make sure you really understand how to play against it this coming weekend, next weekend, you know, in the time frame before Bosch is legal. Because this is the deck you're going to be playing against. And a lot of the same interactions are going to be key in the format post-Bosch too. So I definitely would familiarize myself with the main board of this deck and how it plays, and be ready to play against it. We'll talk about the extra deck real quick too. We have a copy of Ignister. The reason I'm not playing like 2 copies of Ignister and a Magister or something, even though that opens up a lot of plays and a lot of card advantage, is that the 1 copy is normally enough to just end the game. You don't have to just make Ignister to make Ignister. When you make Ignister, you want to be clearing your opponent's pendulum scales, getting something off the board that was a problem. You don't need it just to make damage ever. You can push damage through with your rank 4s. We have 1 copy of Cyframe Omega. Omega is actually insane. This is the one that you really just want to make for, not no reason, but it's easy to just float an Omega and get a ton of advantage out of it. So that's kind of the rationale between only playing 1 Ignister. You're not just going to float Ignisters. You're going to play them to make plays. Like I said, our game should only last a couple turns. So if you needed Ignister twice, that means you're not making the most out of your pushes 9 times out of 10. Against Cosmo, I've wanted an extra 1 a couple times, but I think that's kind of something I'm willing to trade off. You could certainly fit an extra Ignister and a Magister in if you wanted to, but I don't think it's necessary. The Omega, like I said, is really the level 8. You want to just float. We have 1 Naturia Beast. Naturia Beast is just super key to locking down your opponent, keeping them off their pendulum scales if you can set up first. Next we have, where the heck that card go? Oh, there we go. Our two fusions, we have one Seraphonite and one Norden. We're lucky enough to only have to play one copy of each of these, in part because we only play 2 of each fusion spell, and in part because of Daigusto Emerald. With Emerald, we can, instead of using 2 copies of each of these cards, just use one of each and play Emerald to get them back if we needed the effects again. Emerald also doubles up in this deck by being able to revive Gem Knight Garnet, so it can actually create damage as well. To go along with the rank 4s, we have one copy of Masquerade to push OTKs through. A copy of Abyss Dweller to lock up graveyard strategies. We have a couple other cards for utility. We have a Direwolf and a Castell to help clear out our opponent's back rows and anything else they might have, including like face up, floodgates, like Cherry Beast and stuff. We have a copy of Trapeze Magician also to help force through damage. It also floats reasonably well. Then a copy of Feral Imps. It does kind of everything. You can just make it so you have a body in play to help yourself not die, as well as searching up a combo piece. It's also a key card in that it finds Mass Chameleon to make this guy, or Palbur to make this guy. So it's just an incredible card. It's just necessary to have an extra deck. And finally we have our little Tellarknight engine, Constellar engine. I don't know which one it is. We have Ptolemaeus, Diamond, and Pleiades. Ptolemaeus Diamond lets you shut down Burning Abyss if you needed that in your strategy somewhere, and setting up Pleiades early in the game, especially alongside your Naturia Beast, can keep your opponent from doing anything. So if they don't have their scale set up with a list that's kind of just as generic as mine, and you go into Pleiades while you have, that's not how that play looks actually, but whatever. You go into Pleiades while you have Nat Beast in play, your opponent's options are very limited. You assume they're not playing trap cards most likely because they have a similar list. Like I said, the deck's very standard and doesn't have a ton of room for activities. So you put them in a position where they're going to have to make a rank 4 to deal with your Nat Beast there by doing something like summon Special Jacobite, summon Special Hat Tricker. And in that case, you just Pleiades the rank 4. So now your opponent has to do something the next turn to deal with this guy, or they're just dead. They might even just be dead on that one. So you can create a lot of situations where your opponent just has no chance of winning the game through plays like that. Which is really dumb, but too good to pass up, obviously, when you're playing a lot of mirror matches. So that's the list. It is a super standard deck. I do think it's the best deck in the format right now, though if I was going to a regional, I would play the Odd Eyes variant because I think it's a lot more fun and has a lot of different advantages that this deck doesn't have. One of the biggest ones being a lot of people aren't really sure how to play against the deck, which is something I really enjoy taking advantage of. So that's just my 2 cents on that. This is definitely the stronger deck. What this deck does is more powerful. This deck OTK is easier. It's just all around a better deck, I think. This deck is absolutely insane. If you haven't played with it at all, I would highly recommend it. It's a ton of fun to play, actually. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about this one. Just make sure you guys are familiar with this deck if you're going to regionals this upcoming weekend, because you're going to need to play against it and you're going to have to be able to beat it in order to qualify for nationals if you're not qualified yet. So thanks a ton for watching, guys. I hope you took something away from this video. If you have questions about the deck list, let me know down below. I know this isn't anything revolutionary or fancy, but I did just want to get this on video, make sure you guys were well familiarized with the deck, how it worked. Yeah, I guess if you don't know these cards, I don't know if I gave a very in-depth explanation of anything. If you're not familiar with some of the cards, like the Performage stuff, I know I've made a Performage video before, which I would recommend also watching if you aren't exactly familiar with how the deck works, because I think I give a better in-depth explanation of what the cards do there. This deck is super similar, but it's just got a little bit extra redundancy from the Magicians in it. So yeah, just check all that stuff out. Hope you guys took something away from this video, and I will be back with more content soon. Thanks so much for watching, guys.